Dark beer is delicious, right, Taplines listener? I mean, I certainly think so. And you can't respond because it's a podcast. So I'm just going to assume you agree and move on. The rest of the world has been clued into the luxurious delights of stouts, porters, and other ink-hued ales for centuries, but the post-prohibition American beer drinker had a limited selection of mostly lighter beers for most of the 20th century. As a nation, we therefore lost some of our taste for dark, layered, complex beers, looking askance at them as heavy gutbusters. It was a logical response from a drinking public primed light in color, light in calorie adjunct lagers that were then locked in fierce competition for supermarket supremacy, as we've discussed in previous Taplines episodes with the inimitable historian and friend of the show, Maureen Ogle. Go check those episodes out if you haven't yet. But that assumption was also wrong, as you likely know, and a dozen years ago in Colorado, one brewery looked to nitrogen to prove it to the masses. When Left Hand Brewing opened for business outside of Denver in the early 90s, the plan wasn't to become known nationwide as the Milk Stout Brewery or the Nitro Brewery, or certainly not the Nitro Milk Stout Brewery. But when it introduced its chocolatey, none-too-heavy milk stout in the aughts, people loved it. And especially the silky smooth nitro draft pour with which it quickly became synonymous. Co-founder and CEO Eric Wallace and the Left Hand team started wondering, hey, if Guinness is able to package beers on nitro, couldn't we? That simple question turned out to have a complicated and costly answer, and Guinness wasn't too keen on revealing it. But Wallace and company eventually figured it out anyway. The result was Left Hand Milk Stout Nitro in the bottle, which debuted in all its widget-free, hard-pouring, light-mouth-feeling glory at the Great American Beer Festival in 2011. It was the first American brewery to pull off nitro in the bottle, and the first craft brewery too, of course. Today, Eric Wallace joins Taplines to talk about how it all went down. It's Left Hand Brewing co-founder and CEO Eric Wallace. It's Milk Stout Nitro. It's the emergence of American craft beer's nitro pioneer. And it's all right here, right now, on Vine Pair's Taplines. Ooh, listener, you feel that? Feels a little smooth in here, an absence of turbulence. We're silky, we're velvety, we are cruising on all cylinders here in the Taplines studio today because we're joined by a man with a plan to give Americans their nitro beer experience. I'm talking, of course, about Eric Wallace, the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of the one, the only Left Hand Brewing in Longmont, Colorado. Eric, welcome to Taplines, my man.
Thanks, Dave. Happy to be here.
Eric, you're joining us from Left Hand. You're in Longmont. I understand there's a little bit of construction out your way at the moment.
Yeah, I'm watching them build a bridge right outside my window across the banks of the mighty St. Vrain.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us on what is, I'm sure, a chaotic and maybe a little bit of a cacophonous day in Longmont, although we can't hear it here, so we appreciate the sound quality that you've been able to deliver for us here in the Taplines virtual studio. But enough about what's going on in Longmont today, because as our Taplines listeners know, Eric, this is a history podcast. We talk about modern beer history, everything from the post-prohibition era right up onto the present day as we're recording this in late 2023. But we're going to be looking back today. You're here to talk about a seminal moment, I think, not only in Left Hand's history as a brewery, but also in the American craft beer landscape, because Left Hand was pivotal, was pioneering when it came to, bringing nitro beer to the American masses. I mean, obviously, there were some other examples of nitro beer, but when no one had really ever wed craft beer and nitro before Left Hand. So we're here to talk about today. Eric, we have the Taplines time machine, and I usually turn it over to the guest to ask them where they believe this story should begin? Left Hand, of course, founded in 1993, put out your first beer in 1994. Do we start there? Do we start before? When does the Nitro piece of the puzzle come into the picture, Eric?
Well, Nitro came in certainly after we started, but before we started packaging Milk Stout Nitro, for sure. I mean, a lot of breweries, I think back then, figured out it's fairly straightforward to take a blended gas and, force carbonate a keg to a nitro spec, or pretty damn close to a nitro spec, and pour it through your own tap room. And that's kind of how we started. I mean, the Milk Stout hit the market. Just the straight CO2 Milk Stout hit the market, and we as a seasonal in the late '90s, and we were nitrogenating that a little bit here and there into kegs, and more people, when they tasted it, said, "Oh yeah, if you could make some of that for me, I would put it on." So we started playing around with how do we do it on a repeated basis, consistently, quality, in enough to empty a bright tank,
Right.
Back then, it's like we had 20-barrel bright tanks in the 60s, back in the early days. So it's like, how do we, or 40s? How do we get that going? And so we tried a bunch of different ways. We tried a bunch of different equipment and all kinds of stuff, and I think we learned most of the ways you can fail at doing it, and which made us better in the end. But we started doing quite a bit of draft, and a couple of our guys here in-house said, man, if the draft is working and we have CO2 package in glass, it's like, what if we could do nitro in glass? Because we didn't have a canning line yet. Our canning line didn't come into play until 2015. And so we started investing a little bit of money and running some experiments and playing, with James's law and gas solubility and the temperature charts and all of that, and trying to get closer and closer and seeing what could happen. Working with OI, our glass supplier, working with them a little bit on what can we do in the bottle. And over the course of a couple of years and a couple $100,000 of test equipment and
R&D.
all kinds of stuff. R&D. It took us a while, and it was expensive. We started getting closer and closer, and I remember there was kind of a critical conversation. I was upstairs in Mark and Jake's office one day, and they're like, "Here we are, we're playing around. We're getting closer and closer and closer." And they said, we need to spend, there was some crazy number, $50,000 on this piece of equipment or whatever. I said, wait a minute. All right, where are we so far? How close are we? And we were making progress. I said, let's see how close we can actually get before I just go out and keep writing checks. We're already a lot of money into this thing. We didn't know if we could get there or not.
Right.
But we known that Guinness had done it without a widget for a brief period of time. There were some weird things about that package because they had a big neck label on it that covered there was a big headspace up here in the top.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen those packages in years, but we're like, there's something going on here, and we need to figure it out. So we
that was when was Guinness, like, when did Guinness start bottling? Do you remember? Like, because whereabouts are we talking about? Yeah.
We're back in what, 2000.
Like the aughts or so, right?
2009, 2010. We were working on this. 2011 is when we did the big rollout in September.
Sure.
2011. But
so you knew it was possible.
We knew that they figured something out. We didn't know if we could do it in our kind of bottle. How's it going to handle? How's a 6-pack? How is rattling it going to? All these different questions from a safety standpoint, because these bottles operate at a higher pressure. I mean, you're dealing with nitrogen, which is far less soluble than CO2. So all of that technical stuff we were working through, we're measuring, we're buying all this equipment we didn't have in order to actually know exactly what's going on in there. And you know, a bunch of trial and error, a couple of minor injuries later, we were able to. We were able to. We got to the point where we were right there. It's like, okay, if we can pour this blind, and our panel, our validated panel, can't tell the difference, then we're there. That was kind of that's what we were going for. We don't want to be, oh, that's pretty good for a bottle. We wanted it to be spot on, and that's where the hard pour came on. If you look right here, we're pouring straight into the glass.
Sure. For our listening audience that's not watching the video, what Eric is showing is on every Milk Stout Nitro bottle, there's a little graphic that describes the hard pour. Eric, for the benefit of our listening audience today, would you describe the hard pour, the technique, for anyone who doesn't know what you're describing here?
Yeah, on the side of the label, written upside down, so that there is absolutely no way to screw this up, though I have seen it screwed up thousands of times. But on the bottle itself, it says, activate your nitrogen, pour hard to release the nitro magic. You can go onto a little website and see, but you basically uncap it. It's got to be cold. Uncap it and make it vertical. Turn it 180 and dump it into a stout glass as hard as you can. And that activates it, and that's where the cascade comes, and that's how you create that smooth, soft, silky, creamy head that nitro beer is so famous for, and which really, really works so beautifully with a creamy stout like Milk Stout.
And that head, as you described, the cascade, that is sort of the close up. I think that a lot of drinkers, even mainstream drinkers who haven't had the luck or the good fortune to come across Nitro Milk Stout, Left Hand's beer, are familiar with, because you see in all the Guinness commercials dating back to time immemorial the cascading head that's sort of going down the side of the pint glass rather than up, and it's just a beautiful visual. And obviously Left Hand, you guys were able to figure that out. I love the idea here, or the dynamic that you've sort of described when you're developing what would become Nitro Milk Stout in bottles, right? This product is not yet available. We're talking about at the end of the aughts, even though, do you remember when you introduced the beer as a seasonal way back when?
I think it was 1998, the winter of 98. My partner Dick had gotten back he'd been in Tanzania, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, and traveled around Central Africa a little bit. And he came back. It's like, hey, I tried this Castle Stout. It's a milk stout, kind of a style that pretty much had practically disappeared in the U.S. Mm-hmm. I'm only aware of one that was available back then. And we knew oatmeal stout, but we kind of dug into the style and brewed some up as a wintertime seasonal, and it was really successful and popular. So the following year we did it in bombers, and I think we did it in bombers 2 years, and then we did it in 6-packs. It's still as a seasonal, and when the
CO2, just CO2.
Yeah, it was just CO2. Right. When the 6-packs hit, then it started to tear. And for us, it was really weird. It was really weird because the first states that really adapted it most were more in the South. It's like the hottest states were drinking the stout the most.
Huh.
And that was bizarre to us.
Yeah.
And in Colorado in that time, amber ale still was the king of the beer scene in Colorado. Mm-hmm. So Sawtooth was still crushing for us, and that was still our number one. But Milk Stout started to grow. I think we were 16 or 17 years in when Milk Stout finally passed up Sawtooth, which was a bitter, basically.
Yeah. So you introduce Left Hand as Milk Stout, as a seasonal in the late 90s. When you start putting it in draft, you're nitrogenating, the kegs, so you're starting to get some of that nitro experience. What is the reception like to the draft product, the Nitro draft product? I mean, obviously, you guys are getting good traction with it. Is there education that you guys find you're having to do? I mean, how familiar was your drinker in the early aughts, in the mid aughts, with the concept of nitro. For listeners who weren't drinking at that time, can you characterize the landscape a little bit as it pertains to, nitro beers?
I think really the primary draft was Guinness. I mean, that's what everybody, that was like the nitro beer that you would see on in bars. There might be a couple scattered around random ones, but that's what people knew.
Yep.
And we were a stout, but we're on the other end of the stout spectrum. Theirs is a dry Irish stout, and this is a more sweet milk stout, so creamier. And so we love doing side by side, samples for people because we more frequently than not won those head-to-head competitions. People like to drink this one better. It's a little softer, creamier, more balanced. It doesn't have the little dry bite at the end that an Irish stout would have. So we were just out there, and in draft. So draft was not a problem. I mean, knocking off a Guinness handle, that's challenging. But if they didn't have Guinness on and we could sample them, we often were able to get the sale. So we started getting out there pushing, and it started to it started to grow and grow and grow. But we only had CO2 in bottle.
Right. So you mentioned like this idea of maybe knocking off a Guinness handle, which segues nicely into a question that I was wondering as I was sort of prepping for this episode. What was your relationship, if any at all, with Guinness as a brand at this time? I mean, you're moving into a nitro space. I have to imagine they don't really see you as a competitor at this point. Left Hand is not doing the type of volume that Guinness is doing back then. But did you have any dialogue with Guinness as a brand? Hey, we're trying to do nitro. Can you share some tips on like how to do it? Like what was there conversation there or not so much?
No, we never any brewery to brewery conversation. I wouldn't know how to even approach them.
Just send an email to the info@guinness.com.
I'd been to their brewery before, St. James Gate, but I'd never met anybody mucky mucks from Guinness.
Yeah.
No, we basically started playing around trial and error. We understood physics, and there's companies out there selling equipment that purportedly can do this well. Some of it can, and some of it not as well. So there's a variety of that stuff out there. But our experience with Guinness was that they were on a different kind of gas, and from time to time, their tech in Colorado is not a Guinness guy. He's like works for the distributor, would end up screwing up all the CO2 beers on a like 8-tap system because he was trying to get it to pour Guinness right. And as the guy who was out there trying to keep our beer pouring correctly, I would run across this more than once. Probably somebody that wasn't fully trained or whatever. Yeah. So we had those kind of issues. So we understood there's a different gas working here. There's different solubility ratios and all of this other stuff. So we just started working on and doing it on small scale was really easy. Doing it on a larger scale, put on a handle, make sure that they've got the right gas. I mean, a lot of places trying to pour it and not equipped to pour it. So there was a lot of education on the technical side for people pouring draft. But that was just like that's what we did anyways all day long. We're always out there trying to educate people. You're educating people left and right. And I would say the most common reaction when they would taste this is like, oh my God, I didn't know beer could taste like that. Yeah. And that was like fairly common. And a lot of people would say, well, I don't drink dark beer. It's like, what do you mean you don't drink dark beer? Oh, it's not good. It's like, what's not good about it? Like, do you drink coffee? It's like, do you like chocolate? It's like, do those flavors scare you? It's like, no, I love that stuff. It's like, so if you don't think about it as a beer, just think about it as flavor and then tell me what you think. And they taste it and go, oh my God. That was a very common reaction. Oh my God. Yeah. Probably the most common reaction. Like, I didn't know that I liked beer.
I'm not surprised to hear that. I mean, I think that Left Hand Nitro Milk Stout for many drinkers, including myself, is a transcendent or like gateway part of their drinking career, their drinking journey, right? Like when I first came across Nitro Milk Stout, it would only have been 1 to 2 years after you guys started putting it in bottles. This would have been the early 2010s, maybe 2012, 2013. I was in New York City. And it was just, it was an eye-opening experience in terms of palate, in terms of mouthfeel, in terms of, presentation in the glass. If I decided to pour it instead of drink out of the bottle, which I typically did. Although I'll admit to you, Eric, I did drink it out of the bottle more than once. I'm sorry. I know I was not hard pouring as I should have been, but
I have a friend who said, "Hey man, I bought a 6-pack of your milk stout and I took it home and I drank a couple and it was flat. And then I read the label and I go, oh, I'm a dumbass. It's like, and I poured it into a glass the way it says to do it, and it's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's like, it makes a difference.
Well, I'll proudly admit that I was, or not so proudly, but I will honestly admit that I definitely made that mistake more than once. But my point is that it was this really eye-opening beer. It was this really sort of, like I described the experience a moment ago as transcendent. And I think like there's just this, you get this, or I did at least, this idea like, oh shit, like what else don't I know about beer? If I didn't know about this, like I must not know about other shit too, right? And so like it helped sort of broaden the horizon for what I expected as a drinker. Certainly, from a reporting perspective, it broadened my expectations for what the spectrum of flavor was out there and how people are how breweries were building businesses around it. So Left Hand Milk Stout Nitro, I think, was really instructive for me on several different planes, but. Eric, I want to like sort of dial into this idea you mentioned just a moment ago or earlier in our conversation. You guys have this product on draft. People are loving it. It is just this really excellent experience. I was lucky enough that you guys decided to put it in bottles because that's how I first got to enjoy it when I was living in New York. But was there ever a question of like whether this was even necessary? I mean, you described how expensive it was, how much tinkering you guys did. You weren't even sure it was possible. Was there a moment where you thought, hey, maybe this isn't worth it. Maybe this should be a draft only offering. Why bother? Put it in bottles.
Well, that was our plan, but it was an internal kind of conversation that was going on, and two of our tinkerers, that thought that it might be possible, and I was willing to give them enough rope to see if we could do it.
Yeah.
So it was. I mean, as breweries, especially in the early days, we were recreating. We were forensically digging back into history, trying to dig up styles or trying to reproduce styles that had disappeared in the U.S., taking most of our inspiration from Europe. Mm-hmm. So that we were used to introducing people to something that was weird. I mean, we were making Juju Ginger, back in 1994, where we're adding ginger root to a pale ale. Yeah. And that was just bizarre. I mean, people are like, you can't do this. This is illegal. It's like, what's illegal about it? It's like, It's not illegal. Well, it's got an Ethiopian lion in red, gold, and green on it. It's like, so it's got ginger in it. It's a great beer. So we're constantly trying to create new stuff and bring more people in. And ironically, Milk Stout is, I think, the most effective gateway beer, we were talking about, that we've ever put out. Because, but early days we'd have, so let's say we had Sawtooth, which we marketed as an ESB, an extra special bitter, and we had a pale ale, and people go, oh, bitter, I don't want that. I want the pale ale. I was like, actually, you probably want, if the bitter scares you, you should probably have the bitter, because the bitter is not going to be as bitter as the pale ale. Trying just all of the ins and outs of beer. But stout, the number of people that it's converted is like more than any other beer we've got, because it's unexpected. Yeah, it's that soft silky, unexpected. I mean, a friend of mine from my Kiwanis club, like she drank only wine and maybe some liquor. And I did a beer tasting for my club here at the brewery. And the next time I saw her, he goes, "I hate you. I have a 6-pack of milk stout in my fridge now." And I was never a beer drinker. I didn't have to worry about beer. And now all of a sudden I realized that I like beer. And I think it is true that once you've cracked in, like, oh, I like stout. Stout's a beer. What's with that yellow stuff? And what's with that red stuff? And what's with that hazy stuff? And people start to really go, they start their journey. And there are a variety of entry points. Most people start their entry at light lager that's been pretty much watered down and all the rough edges rubbed off of it. So everything from there is kind of getting more and more flavor intensity and a wider range of flavors.
You can only go up from there. Yeah.
We're just starting from the other end,
Yeah.
It's like, boom, this is a big one. And like, now that I know that I like sweeter beers or softer beers, what's all this hoppy stuff?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's all this lighter stuff?
And off you go from there. All those
what's all this sour stuff?
Yeah.
What's all this fruity stuff?
Yeah. Right on. When you introduce, one more question about the R&D. We're talking about expensive. Do you have any sense for how much money you actually wound up putting in? Like, have you ever? Maybe it's a figure that you're horrified to add up, so you never have. Have you ever done the back of the napkin math on how much R&D you guys actually put out there?
Yeah, 2 years and a couple $100,000.
Couple $100,000, yeah. But you in 2011, this pays off. You introduce the beer for the first time. You rolled out just in Colorado, I'm guessing, right? What was do you remember the rollout strategy? Yeah.
And then I think we did 8 major rollouts across the country. Mm-hmm. We would go to a significant market. We were in Texas, we were in Chicago, we were in New York, we were in Ohio. We went around and we did a bunch of rollouts and got it launched. And really good response. And that kind of, as that started to happen, we start getting good market data, and then the chains start to jump into it, and that kind of starts pulling us into more and more states. We were only in 25 or 30 states back then, and it started dragging us into the rest of the country. That wasn't really a part of the plan. It was just kind of a byproduct of the fact that chains wanted us, and they have certain footprints, and you have to have distribution in their footprint if you're going to get into their stores and into their sets. So this beer is why we actually are in 46 states now, is because the market started pulling on it, which was really, really, really a good feeling and a good experience that I will look upon those days very fondly.
That's got to be pretty cool. You've got to realize, like, oh man, we got a hot hand here. No pun intended. We got a hot left hand here. We've got something that everybody wants. Maybe, it sounds like, based on what you're describing, like on a scale or at a scope that you just really couldn't have anticipated. But that's got to be all. I mean, and look, it's a good problem to have, right? I'm sure any brewer would tell me the same thing. But I got to imagine it's also pretty intense, right? Like, if you're in conversations with national chains and they say, hey, we need you to ramp up production, we need you to be able to, fulfill this, this volume in this many states and whatever. There's challenges there, right, Eric? That's not just, you can't just press a button and say, all right, cool, we're scaling up.
Well, there's huge challenges, and we're an independent craft brewer. I mean, my partner and I were at the Air Force Academy together. I mean, we're not like silver spoon kind of kids. We were in the Air Force. We got out. We started a brewery. We got some friends and family money, and we started growing. So we saw 10 years of double-digit growth. I mean, a couple of years we were growing 50% a year. And so when that starts to happen, it's quite a crazy and scary ride, because you're dumping millions of dollars a year into expansion. We're building buildings, we're expanding buildings, we're adding tanks, we're adding equipment, we're getting a faster bottling line, we're buying new keg line, we ended up buying a canning line when we started canning this as well. So it was just going it was going crazy, and we were having to plan, where's all of this cash coming from?
Right.
So every year for the planning, like, well, we have to operate profitably. We have to generate enough cash flow. Then we have to borrow money. So it was just it was a constant, running the business. When I think there was in one 3-year period, we put something like $9 million into the brewery.
Whoa.
And we don't have a big brother. We're not owned by a big company.
Right.
We were just having to figure it out on our own with our bankers and operating to be able to generate enough cash to keep it going.
This is back in the yeah, I bet you, man. This is back in the early 2010s. Can you describe sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, 06 to about 2015 was just off the charts.
But it sounds like it accelerated quite a bit after you guys figured out how to bottle it. Beer. Yeah, gotcha.
Absolutely. It just went. It was going, and then it just really went. We went from 8,000 barrels, like 80,000 barrels in 10 years.
Whoa, 10x volume, 10x capacity.
Yeah,
that's a lot of stainless steel that you had to buy over the course of a decade.
yeah, that's 8 figures easily.
Oh my goodness. So what was this is a slight detour, but I think some of our more trade-oriented listeners would be curious to know, in the late part of last decade, 2017, 18, 19, banks had sort of become apprised of craft brewing as an industry. There's maybe more appetite for, debt from the craft brewing industry. What was it like? What was your relation? I'm sure you had relationships with local banks that you had borrowed from before, but you start to have to go out and find capital, find debt from, at a level you'd never had before. Did bankers, did the financial industry understand like the pitch that you were making? Was there challenges on the financial level there?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, I have a really strong board and quite a group of financially savvy people, and a lot of those guys came to us when we bought Tabernash and did the merger in 1998. So we acquired people that knew a lot about business and financing and all that stuff. So that was really helpful, and they definitely gave us a lot of good advice through those years. There was bankers kind of woke up and go, yeah, this is a business that's growing. We can lean into it. You'll also recall private equity certainly came roaring into the space because they thought that they could make some money in the space as well.
Sure.
And things started to get really, really tight and crowded. But we always ran quite conservatively and focused on keeping a pretty strong balance sheet and owning our real estate. And also we have 4 different banks that we currently have relationships with, and we try to keep everything broken so not everything's cross-collateralized. So you can use different assets to do things independently of each bank, and they all tend to know each other around here anyway. Some are bigger and some are more community banks, but maintaining good relationships with those guys, making sure they have a really clear understanding of our business, being really transparent. I mean, it's like, here's the good, here's the bad. That's been really, really helpful. That and owning the real estate, and having a long-term strategic vision where we're not looking for a big transaction to sell out. I could have done that 10 years ago. Yeah. And it was a choice that we made that we weren't going to go there. We feel that there's more value in Left Hand in the way we're able to contribute to the community, the beer community, to our local communities, the communities where we sell. Like Bike MS, we're the national beer sponsor for that.
Right,
we've raised like approaching $8 million. For MS, just
incredible.
Getting out there and riding bikes and using beer to make friends and raise money for a really important cause. We like what we're able to do as an operating business for the community, for our people, for the next generation, and having businesses that are firmly rooted in their community and that are focused on more than just maximizing every penny of profit that they can out of the business is a little more gratifying than just a pure mercenary approach in our ethos.
Sure. This is in 2011 as the first year that Milk Stout on Nitro appears in bottles for the American consumer. That's also the year, listener, if you don't remember your craft beer history, your beer industry history, that's also the year that Anheuser-Busch InBev completes its acquisition. It had already owned like a big minority stake in Goose Island, but it bought the rest of it in 2011. And that would kick off, a feeding frenzy, a buying bonanza, whatever you want to call it, led mostly by Anheuser-Busch InBev, but also Molson Coors gets a little piece of the puzzle. Constellation kind of infamously comes in hot and spends a ton of money on Ballast Point and ditches it just a few years later. They made a big mistake, $1 billion. But what Eric, what you're describing is there's this moment where all of a sudden big quote unquote strategic partners want to get much more exposure to the craft brewing industry. Now that has changed. I mean, by the end of last decade, I think some of those strategic partners had a bit of a hangover. Earlier this year in 2023, we saw Anheuser-Busch InBev cut bait on about half of its acquired craft portfolio, selling a bunch of those off to Tilray Brands, which is a big cannabis conglomerate. But at the time, that was not what was happening. At the time, we were sort of watching that ramp up rather than coming down the other side of it. That's a big wind up for my next question, Eric, which is, where does Milk Stout Nitro fall? As you start seeing that, that all happen in 2011, 2012, early last decade. You've got this new product that's bringing you into national chains. It's bringing you into a broader distribution footprint. Those are positive things, but it strikes me as also you have broader flanks now, right? You have more exposure to chain retail where the big guys, that is their bread and butter, right? That's where they sort of own shelf space. They write the planograms. They do category management. That's a different world that you all of a sudden get pulled into because you have this terrific, Milk Stout on Nitro. You have this bottled beer that everyone wants. Can you characterize that for listeners? Like what, sort of the broader craft beer landscape is shifting as you're having this big hit on your hands?
Yeah, we're going from a couple thousand breweries to, all of a sudden, it's like almost 5x now, right?
Sure, we're just about 10,000. Yep,
a couple of thousand. We were on a tear, and we were just hanging on, trying to keep up as it dragged us out. But exactly, our logistical lines, our ground lines of communication were getting stretched all the way across the country and into a few other countries, across the different ponds.
Yeah.
So we were getting dragged out there, and we were also at the same time thinking, this is a bubble. Craft beer is the it girl. It's ubiquitous. It's on TV shows. It's everywhere. Everywhere you turn around, you go to the Craft Brewers Conference, and there are 400 distributors, and they're there to talk to each other, but they're really there to pitch, brands to join them. Yeah, it's that was the feeding frenzy for us when we saw that they would take anything that you made. We're like, this can't last. There's no way. We'd lived through the first shakeout already, right? Sure. Back in the late 90s, early aughts. Sure. We'd already been through that 7 or so turbulent years where craft did not grow. It actually shrank for several of those years in terms of the number of operating breweries. And growth basically was at zero. Yeah. I can remember Dave Edgar in the early days at CBC going, craft beer sales are at an all-time high. But there was a couple years where that was just like $10,000 higher maybe for the whole country or whatever. It was like flat.
Yeah.
So we were thinking there's so many people getting in. There's so many people that are getting in that aren't in it because they're here to save the world. They're in it because they're going to make a fast buck.
Sure.
And they're going to sell out. There's breweries that were starting up that hadn't brewed any beer that were pitching. I sat down with all the big breweries, and they go, we're getting calls from breweries that ask if we want to buy them, and they haven't even made any beer yet. They don't have any distribution. That's if you're paying attention, I mean, all the signs were there, right? It's like,
sure.
It's not like
it
can't go up forever, and the market is not infinite. This is a bubble. So we were preparing for the bubble, and we were taking a lot of steps to make sure that we were ready for the shakeout, to where we are today, where it certainly feels like a shakeout. The lenders are not nearly as anxious to lend to you. Landlords are cranking up rents, and a lot of breweries are either moving or merging or, closing down or whatever. I mean, the crunch is here, and we're in so many places that you've got to find your new level. I mean, with 5 times the number of breweries, I mean, certainly our sales are down over the last several years, and you've got to adapt. You've got to learn to adapt, and you've got to run your business at the level it is, not the level you wish it was. So a lot of hard decisions, and a lot of morphing and changing what we do. We've tried to, in order to keep focus on Milk Stout, kind of our lead out of state, and in state we're known for other beers too, but out of Colorado, the Milk Stouts are our lead, and Nitros are kind of our gig. So the peanut butter Milk Stout, that's kind of a natural. The candy cane Milk Stout this year, I wish we'd have bought more packaging, because that thing blew up. We could probably sell 2 times as much or 3 times as much candy cane Milk Stout. It's just, we just had one state refuse to take their order, and we turned around to our local wholesaler and was like, we'll take as much as you got.
Yeah, wow.
So it's already selling out left and right. And then, we're working on other things. I know this is about stout, but Nitro, we've got this Belgian white Nitro.
Cool.
Which it's the first one in the world as far as we know. So we've played with this for quite a while.
Yeah.
And for those of you that don't know, our head brewer is Gary Glass. Does that name ring a bell? Used to run the American Homebrew Association.
Right on.
And this was one of his award-winning homebrew recipes, actually. So we started tinkering with that, and we started nitrogenating it, and it's actually fantastic. We've run a couple of production batches, and we're not really rolling it out until next spring. But it's starting to hit the market in a limited way, and we're hoping to try to keep some of that focus on what's something that we do that makes a difference on a national scale, because there's no way, if you're out there just competing on IPA, that you're going to be able to stay relevant. There's
impossible
20, 30,000, 50,000 IPAs out there.
Right.
So it's just not a place, not a sandbox big enough for everybody.
Yeah.
But doing something unique, whether it's Milk Stout or Belgian White Nitro, just trying to see if there's a way to stay in national distribution and on the chain store shelves, in the face of quite significant retrenchment by so many different breweries. I was just sitting at the Colorado Brewers Guild had their summit a couple weeks ago, and one of the talks I sat in, a guy got up, and he was basically, pitch was aimed at breweries significantly smaller than us, I would say, but his whole pitch was, here's how you evaluate your costs and your margin and your business. And yeah, you might be only selling, 500 barrels through your tasting room or whatever, and 5,000 barrels in distribution. But here, let me show you why you need to focus on your tasting room, and you should not be focused on trying to outcompete the distributing breweries, because there's no money there.
Right.
The margins are so tight, and the resources are so vast. So I think breweries in our space we're definitely in the squeeze zone right now.
Yeah.
We're a distributing brewery. We're in national distribution. How do you maintain that, and how do how do you stay relevant? Those are huge questions right now.
It's a huge challenge, and it's one that's being faced not only by Left Hand, but also by, like you said, breweries in that tranche, right? Like that middle of the market. I mean, not that the liquid is middling, but in terms of volume, the middle of the market, more or less. If you stay low to the ground, like those small breweries that you're mentioning, man, there's a business there. It's a totally different business than the one that Left Hand is in, or certainly that the one that, the Sierra Nevadas of the world and the Boston Beer Companies of the world are in. But, you can make that work. But once you go distributed, it's a totally different ballgame. I hear you on that. That's something I've certainly has come up a ton in my reporting as I've spoken to other breweries. Eric, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Before you ask,
please.
Yeah, we look at our business as two really distinct parts: the own premise, and the distribution. And when we started, there were no tap room breweries really. You were either a brew pub with a restaurant, or you were distributing brewery, packaging, distributing. That was it. So that's our DNA. But our tasting room, we put a lot of focus on that because that builds brands, and there's good margin coming through there. And then that's why we started a place down in Denver, in Rhino, as well, just to raise the brand flag in the biggest city in the state, but also to focus on you can generate margin on your own beer like 10x and more,
wow,
on a keg of beer, 15x. Than trying to just stay in distribution. It's a lot of capital for a skinny margin.
Yeah. And it's a tough balance.
I just wanted to make sure all the time to kind of anyone that's interested in the whys and wherefores, the tap room explosion. There's a reason for that.
Of course,
you can make a living on a relatively small amount of beer. And that's why the BA, when I was on the board, we had long conversations. We started the taproom classification so that segment, which is the largest segment in the country now, that segment would have significant representation on the Brewers Association board.
Yeah, that provides me, I think, a segue. Let's see here. I think I've got it, Eric. The taproom explosion in the back half of last decade and into this one, pandemic notwithstanding, but there's this idea of like you have to own these channels, right? You can generate more margin, and then you have a way forward in a way that distributed craft has much different and tougher sledding at the moment. It strikes me as sort of a nice ellipsis or a way to get back to what we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, which is that Milk Stout started as a taproom product. The Nitro one did. I mean, it started as a draft product and you distributed it to some extent, but like you got to kind of hand sell it. You got to kind of, interact with your drinkers to understand, what they liked about this before you had to go out and develop it as a packaged product. And Milk Stout Nitro in bottles hits in 2011. When did cans hit? 2018 or so?
2015 is when we got that up and running.
Yeah.
And those are widget cans.
I was going to say cans have the widgets in them, right? Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
We had a big debate here whether we do it widgetless or widget. And it was definitely a split decision here in the company, but we decided to go widget because the winning argument ultimately was, we can hard pour out of a can, but how many people are going to do that? How many are going to go Dave Infante next to the swimming pool and pour it into a glass? Probably not.
Yeah. For every one true connoisseur, there are at least 9 and maybe 99 Americans who just want to drink a can of beer, Eric, Yeah.
And that was the winning argument as we sat around this table, trying to sway our companions. It's like, if you're drinking out of the can, the widget gives you a better experience.
Right.
Because it does the work for you, right? So that's why we use a widget can. Yeah.
That makes sense. But so you guys introduced cans, but this all starts as a draft product. This is where you first start tinkering, and this is where you really see it start to get traction, and that leads to the lightning ride or the roller coaster that Left Hand would get on, and it's been a tremendous success, and it brings you into all of these different states, these new accounts. It pulls you into chain. Sometimes it's you stopped pushing and all of a sudden you get pulled, and as you described, it can be quite intense. But what I'm getting at here is we see a taproom model and we see sort of like the own premise model, being one that's viable here for some small breweries, especially if you're starting out and you don't want to go distributed. That's the way to go. What I wanted to ask you, the long and the short of it is, does something like Milk Stout Nitro in bottle, does that happen in 2023? Let's say, could such a product be developed? It's not that it wasn't expensive at the time, but there was this moment for craft beer where you did have maybe a little bit more runway to tinker and to explore and to get creative. And the drinker was willing to come with you on that journey a little bit more. At least that's my perception of it. I'm curious of your perception as someone who introduced this pioneering product at a time when drinkers were maybe a little bit more receptive to it, at a time when there was maybe a little bit more of a buffer between you and the buzzsaw, so to speak. Does something like a Milk Stout Nitro get invented in a tight market like this?
I have an answer. I have several answers. The first thing is, the first thing that comes to mind is I grew up and went to high school in the golden age of rock and roll, where everybody knew bands. Your access to music was limited. You had vinyl, you had cassettes, you had 8 tracks. CDs came along afterwards. So we were all talking about the same bands, and these are bands that everyone knows: Led Zeppelin, The Who, AC/DC, just
Rolling
like
Stones.
Pink Floyd.
Pink Floyd, yeah.
U2. All of these bands, they were seminal, and everyone knew them. And there was more limited selection. Now everything is so democratized and granular. You can get, if you're a band, you can get on the interwebs and boom, your song is out there. So it's the democratization of music, but the building of really big brands, unless you're Taylor Swift or somebody like that, it becomes less and less the norm, or they're more and more unusual, perhaps. In the same way, when we were blowing up, when there was 2,000 breweries, there was a lot of space. And where I'm heading is, I want to talk about your local multi-tap. Those were the places that built craft. Chicago, believe it or not, for those who remember, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, up until they had the World Beer Cup Craft Brewers Conference there, you could go to Chicago and hit all the key accounts in one day.
Wow.
The Map Room and Hop Leaf and Delilah's. There was only a few places that you needed to go, because if you could sell there, it was going to work. And now there's 100 breweries in Chicago alone. So the market has definitely changed. And the tap house model, there are still great ones out there, but they're far fewer, and they're under duress. They are under major duress, because all of us with our tap rooms are putting the pressure on them.
Sure.
And we're peeling off business. And to the extent that some tap rooms carry other brands as well, you get a more curated experience. There's one right down the river from us that operates as a brew pub, but most of their beer sales, they're a shoe store, and they sell beer in the back.
What?
And they got 20 beers on tap from all around the area.
Man,
Colorado over there all the time.
Colorado is wild, man.
It's a running store, athletic shoe store with a bar on the back. It's awesome. But your multi-taps, you can name them. I can name them. Some of the big ones that we all knew and loved, they're gone.
Sure.
That model is more challenging. And I think all of those things combined make it's certainly not impossible. And people are going to catch lightning in a bottle from time to time. And they're going to do something that's really cool that has a reason to be in the market. But there are going to be fewer and fewer opportunities for that. There's way more distraction. Getting anybody's attention and bandwidth is a serious challenge. Getting people to pay attention more than once is a really serious challenge. And
a customer or a distributor, by the way.
It's just distributors are shedding brands left and right.
Sure.
SKU rationalization is on now. Every year, buyers, the warehouse buyers and managers are tasked to cut 10% of their SKUs or whatever to make the distributors more efficient. And they continue to consolidate. Sheehan's have been, big player in the craft beer distribution business are selling off all of their
that's
operations.
Right. Yep.
And we were with every single one of them. So that creates great turmoil for us. And we're out there looking for distributors that aren't even bigger, where we're even further down their priority list. So we're actually out there actively looking for smaller wholesalers now in those markets where we're changing, because in order to have the attention on the brand, you've got to be high enough up in the priority list to get some of the attention. And we can't afford anymore to have 30-something reps scattered all over the country.
Right.
This doesn't work.
And a beer like Milk Stout Nitro needs that attention. I mean, it has a established brand. People know it. There's no doubt about that. But it is also not the sort of thing where, a distributor rolls into Kroger's and says, all right, you need a light lager? Cool, I got one. You need a hazy IPA? Cool, I got another. It needs that special care. It needs to be, to some extent, to hand sold. It needs the story to be told. And if it is, you open retailers' eyes, you open drinkers' eyes, you give them that transcendent experience that I was describing earlier. But you're right. Like that, at a time like this, I can understand why that's maybe a little bit more challenging than it was even a few years ago.
Yeah. Kroger's, for example. I mean, very real example. We've got a chain team, and we're really focused on making pitches across the whole country and using our regional reps to supplement that effort.
Yeah.
And it's Milk Stout. It's Milk Stout. It's peanut butter Milk Stout. It's now Belgian White Nitro, and then some seasonal stuff. That's about all you can hope for these days.
Yep.
And a lot of distributors won't even bring it in, even if it's pre-sold to some extent, unless you have chain commitments.
Wow.
I mean, that's where it's going. The independents that built the industry are now under severe duress. In Colorado, when we started, the chains couldn't sell anything other than 3.2 beer.
Yeah.
And now the chains have not only full strength beer, but now they just got wine. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing liquor stores getting really crushed. I mean, if you're out in the market, you're seeing empty coolers, half empty shelves.
Wow.
And I think they're just waiting for their lease to run out.
Wow.
And I know it's happening in other states. I know it's happening in Ohio, for example.
Yep.
As all these states change and the big companies are able to finally get laws through and pass and change the way the alcohol business structure is working, it has huge long-term impacts on where you're selling beer to, to whom you're able to sell beer. And for us, I mean, we love the independents because we can walk in and make a sale, but the needle gets moved at the chain level at this point.
Yeah, that's where all the volume is, right? I mean, at one point it was up to like 80% of beer volume during the pandemic through supermarket alone. Now that's
and for us, when the draft business went from a few $100,000 a month to $1,600 a month.
My God.
You're cranking up more packaging until your packaging supplier runs out of supply.
Right. Just came through that fire, man. All the cardboard, all the aluminum. Of course, there were shortages in the supply chain throughout. You've been through the ringer, Eric.
Luckily for us, we have both a bottling line and a canning line, because otherwise we were hosed, and we were getting hosed for quite a while, but it would have been even worse, without some options.
Sure. Eric, thank you so much for taking the time. I was hoping to, as a way of wrapping up, maybe to if you can reach back in the memory bank to 2011, when Milk Stout Nitro first becomes available in bottles. Do you remember how you pitched it to the drinker that didn't understand it? I was hoping maybe for listeners who maybe haven't encountered Milk Stout Nitro in the wild, they could hear the pitch from you on, hey, here's what this is, here's why it's different, here's why you're gonna love it.
Yeah, the general pitch is, hey, you wanna try a beer, and like say you're at a beer fest and you're pouring 3 beers, you're pouring like we're pouring a Pilsner and Sawtooth, a bitter and a stout. And it's like, hey, what do you like? It's like, oh, I don't know. What should I try? It's like, I've already had that one. It's like, well, you should try our stout. It's like, oh, I don't drink stout. It's like, what do you mean you don't drink stout? That's a big statement. It's like, there's a lot of different stouts out there. It's like, you should try this one. It's like, oh, no, I don't like it. It's like, okay, it's free. I'm going to sample you. And if you don't like it, you don't have to drink it. But do you like coffee? Do you like chocolate? Most people like one or both. I mean, most 90-something are going to say yes to one of those. 80% are going to say, 75 are going to say yes to both.
Sure.
And it's like, all right, just think about those flavors, try it. And that's where, you got like an 80% win rate on people that don't like dark beer or don't like beer at all.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm not going to like it. And they try and like, oh, I like it. Or it ranges from, it's not that bad, or it's not as bad as I thought, to this is the best beer I ever had in my life.
Yeah.
So you get it's generally, if you're doing a consumer like survey of, do you like it? It's like you're getting 9s and 10s most of the time.
Yeah.
8s, 9s, and 10s.
Yeah.
So it was really fun. And it almost started off as just a cynical joke. It's like, what should I try? It's like, you should try the stout, And because nobody's going to say they want to try a stout.
Right.
Until they've tried it. And then they realize that they've been missing out. All those years they've been on the planet of legal drinking age, they've been screwing it up. They've not expanded their horizon.
And you helped expand it with this pivotal beer that was the first American craft beer bottled on Nitro, man. You changed a lot of minds, I think. Eric Wallace, thank you so much for joining us on Taplines. It's been a pleasure chatting. Keep doing what you're doing, and I think I'm certainly looking forward to going out and finding some of that Belgian white on Nitro. I'm gonna go pick up a 6-pack as soon as I can lay hands on it.
Use our beer finder. It's gonna be making its way out here through the winter and into the spring.
Well, I look forward to it. All right, Eric, thank you again so much, and good luck with that construction, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks a lot, Dave.
All right. Taplines is recorded in Richmond, Virginia, and produced by yours truly and Darby Seaside, who, along with the talented Shane Farrick, composed our delightful soundtrack. Just listen to it. I also want to give a quick shout out to the entire VinePair team, and especially co-founders Adam Teeter and Josh Mallon, editor-in-chief Joanna Sciarrino, managing editor Tim McCurdy, and art director Danielle Grinberg, who designed our lovely Taplines logo. And of course, a big thank you to you, yes, you listener, for spending time with us week in and week out. We literally couldn't do this without you. I'm Dave Infante, and I'll catch you next time.